Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by with Season 2's update here in Warzone. We obviously saw a pretty significant meta update. We saw several buffs and nerfs to various different weapons. We got the addition of 2 new weapons as well. And so with that today, we're going to go through and break down the new Season 2 meta and go through all the weapons you want to be using, all the weapons that are, relatively top tier and competitive, and then of course the weapons you want to avoid. As we go through it all, if you enjoy the video at all, do me a favor, drop a like on it. It's always really appreciated. And if you're new to the channel, you want to guarantee that every single day you are always up to date with the Warzone meta, the latest news and updates, everything going on in COD. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those post notifications. But like I said, we of course have 2 new weapons, and that means before we can go through any of the patch notes and other changes, we got to rank these. And quite frankly, the BP50 and the Ram 9 are both right up there. The BP50 is a little bit of a trickier one for me, balancing between top tier and competitive. Damage wise, I feel like it's definitely, in the top tier area for sure. The problem is its magazine capacity is not incredible. It's got a faster fire rate and only 45 rounds max is somewhat limiting, but the Holger, we've got that top tier and it's a pretty solid rifle, so we'll say the BP50 is deserving. And then this is an easy choice, the Ram 9 also going right up there with all the other best SMGs in the game as a top tier choice as well. Each of these weapons are very, very good. Personally, I prefer the Ram 9 a little bit more, but they're both very easy to use and they fry when it comes down to it. Now, outside of just our new weapons, I also have the patch notes for all the other weapon updates and other weapon changes that were made. So if you see me looking over here, that's why. Starting first with, well, the Ram 7. This was actually nerfed with its mid and long range damage. Its long range damage got the, bulk of the changes there. However, it's still phenomenal in the early, first damage range, then somewhat in the mid range as well. It's just not going to be that do-it-all rifle anymore. So for that reason, it's going to drop down into the top tier category with some of these other rifles, right? But it's still a fantastic choice, especially for sniper support, or even if you're just playing aggressive on Resurgence or really limiting your gunfights to 40 meters and closer in general gameplay. It's still going to be a great choice, obviously very easy to use. So it got a nerf, but it's still a very, very good option here. We also saw an MCW update that quite frankly is not one I understand. It's just basically a copy and paste of the multiplayer change. They nerfed its ADS speed and its sprint to fire speed. Its damage is pretty mediocre, all things considered. Its conversion kit's very good in my opinion for sniper support, but overall weird change. Not going to really update it too much up or down, but it just seemed a little unnecessary. Now the Holger also got a slight ADS nerf, nothing too crazy because we're using that for long range and ADS isn't the main factor there. An interesting one here, the Geist. This is the start of a lot of MW2 weapon updates that we saw throughout the patch notes. They actually nerfed its headshot multiplier. However, they made the upper torso, arm, and hand multipliers better. So essentially if you're hitting body shots, the gun's going to feel a tad bit better. If you're hitting headshots, it won't feel like it's doing as much as a reward for having crazy good aim and hitting headshots, right? It's still overall a decent rifle. Its TTK though is not going to be drastically different with this update. It's going to stay in competitive, but it's an option you could get by using. I do find this in grounded a lot, and it's like, oh, okay, I'll use this. If I find something better, great. If I don't, this will suffice for the time being, right? The Bass B also got some interesting updates. They nerfed its close range damage, its sprint to fire, and its ADS speed. Really what this does is take away the Bass B sniper support build that we've talked about a lot. It's now, instead of being a do-it-all battle rifle that can be built for close range, mid range, or long range, really just going to be a mid to long range weapon. Now it's still very good for that, but its close range capabilities now are going to be limited, probably where they should have been. A battle rifle probably shouldn't have an SMG alternative that's better than most other SMGs and close range rifles in the game, so balanced it out some. But for the mid to long range, I would still consider this to be absolute meta. Just one of your viable builds is no longer all that viable. This is another bit of a surprising one, honestly. The MTZ-762, we've talked about how broken its TTK is in semi-auto mode. Well, they just fixed that. They completely removed the semi-auto damage profile, so now it's all the same whether you're using full auto or semi-auto. Really not much of a purpose to use semi-auto anymore. It's still a banger though. We'll be talking about this one a bit more in depth in the future because this thing fries. This is one, it's probably a little bit overdue, but I kind of liked the meme of leaving the Sidewinder in garbage, but they did buff its velocity a little bit. It's still really underwhelming for like a mid to long range gun. Its velocity just cannot hang with the meta build on it, but they also did buff its recoil a decent amount too. So it's been a little bit overdue, like I said, but the Sidewinder I think does make it all the way up into the mediocre category here. It's not a crazy popular category. Most of what's in here is not that great, but hey, the Sidewinder is a bit more usable now for sure. The velocity is going to be the main thing you notice though when you are shooting and you're just say, hey, wait a minute, it feels like I'm aiming right on these guys and it's just not hitting. And that's exactly what's happening, because even in like some mid-range fights, it just is not great there, and it's a pretty unforgiving weapon, but it is a little bit more usable now. That Thunder LMG kit's pretty fun, a bit more gimmicky, but it definitely is usable, and I feel like that's a good definition of mediocre. Now the HRM9, they actually nerfed this one in a strange way. They just reduced its max damage range. That's it. So instead of having like a 13-meter damage range for its first damage profile, it's just gonna be like 10 meters now. It is a bit of a nerf, but its damage is still phenomenal in that first damage range. Then even as it drops off, it's still really good for an SMG, so it's gonna be right up here in top tier. You're probably wondering, Zach, wait a minute, the HRM is great, the AMR9 is great, the Ram 9 you said is great, why aren't these absolute meta? To me, I don't feel like any of these SMGs should be absolute meta, because this correctly depicts what the SMG category is, in my opinion, and that is ultra competitive. There's still other SMG changes that we got to talk about, but so many of these you could use, and they're really good. I do think the Rival 9 probably deserves a spot being dropped down, because I don't think it's on the same level, but for the most part, all these SMGs are right there neck and neck with one another, and there is no clear number one option that deserves, in my opinion, to be an absolute meta. They are all just great choices. So if you're wondering why that is, hopefully that clarifies that a little bit. Speaking of other SMG changes, this is one that I'm also a big fan of. The Wasp 9, one of my favorites to begin with, actually got way better with this update. The max damage range got buffed, so it now has a further initial damage range. They also buffed its mid-range range, and its ADS speed is faster now. So this thing is now even better as a sniper support SMG, and it's more aggressive. I love that. It already had a very competitive TTK, and it just got even better. Now this is a pretty significant change to the Lockwood 680. Its mid damage got nerfed pretty severely, all things considered, and on top of that, they also nerfed the meta build for it with the heavy long barrel. Its sprint to fire is atrocious now, so while it's still an all right shotgun, I don't think it's all that competitive compared to where it was before. Definitely a bit more in line with some of these other shotties. So if you're a big Lockwood fan, I'm sorry, but it definitely did not feel as good when I was going through and testing that. The Haymaker also got nerfed pretty decently with its fire rounds. They ended up nerfing the range there, and that again to me does bring this down a little bit more with some of the other SMGs that you could use. If you're using fire rounds, or if you're just using them as like their default standard rounds, they're all going to be relatively in the same category. Now, oddly enough, the broadside did get an ADS speed buff and a sprint to fire speed buff. I'm not sure why, but it's a bit more aggressive now, and probably the shotgun I'd lean on the most if I wanted to spam one. I'm just not a huge shotty guy myself. This is definitely long overdue. The Riveter should have been bumped up from below average way before this. It was definitely in the competitive category. However, they did end up nerfing its mid-range damage and its fire round capability as well, so it's just gonna lump in there with the other shotties now. They're all kind of in the same general grouping post-update here. We did see a couple of other updates to some MW2 shotties. The Bryson 890 got a mid-range nerf, so that's going to be a tad bit worse, but not crazy so that it's going to drop all the way down into a different category here. And then also the Lockwood 300, its Dragon's Breath got nerfed, but that's not really the meta option on the Lockwood 300 to begin with, so that's not a huge deal. And on the MX Guardian, its Dragon's Breath got nerfed as well, but it's already a mediocre, so no real changes need to be made there. It's a sad one for me because it's probably my favorite gun in the game, but the Pulemiot 762 conversion kit actually saw some pretty decent nerfs here. They added a new range and damage in the mid-range, and they nerfed the long-range damage here, and it's enough to really drop it away from some of those other LMGs. So in my opinion, this is something that brings this down more into the top tier category, and it's definitely clearly not the number one option for LMGs anymore. You know, the Bruin really shines, the DG really shines, the Holger, honestly, I probably should bump up into here as well, because that's a great choice too, even though it wasn't touched with this update right there in terms of TTK. So there are a lot of options in the LMG category now. The Pulemiot conversion definitely is not going to be as lethal as it was before though. Hey everyone, quickly wanted to give a shout out to my friends over at G Fuel. We've got our in-game metas that we of course talk about all the time, but we also got to show some love to the out-of-game metas as well. And the most effective tactic available, the meta for staying focused and energized, is picking up some G Fuel. They got a little bit of something for everyone in terms of flavors, but my personal favorites, Hype Sauce, the GOAT. They also just brought back Watermelon Mint, which is absolutely incredible. And lately, I've also been loving the new Sage Mode Hydration Tub as well. There's no caffeine in that, just perfect for staying hydrated. And if you do want to pick up anything for yourself, be sure to throw in code IMMORTAL at checkout for a nice little discount. The link for that will be down below if you're interested. And speaking of making LMGs more viable, the Evolver actually got a pretty significant buff with this update. They ended up buffing its close damage, its long damage, but they nerfed its max damage range. This though makes it a lot more competitive with these other LMGs, while also being one of the easiest guns to use in the game. It is super low recoil, very effective. Now if you're looking for something that is just, you pick it up, you know you're going to do well with it, it's a reliable choice for sure. So significant buff there that actually makes that usable. Competitive was a generous ranking for that beforehand. It was pretty underwhelming, all things considered, so glad to see that got a really big buff. They also nerfed the Eradicator sprint to fire. Not really a huge deal because that's not a stat you're really caring about too much if you're using an LMG. Now, a couple of different MW2 LMGs got some updates. The Icarus got a sprint to fire buff, not really going to do all that much for it. The Rao got a sprint to fire and an ADS buff, nice, but still not a game changer by any means. The RPK also got an ADS speed buff as well. Overall, though, those need more damage updates than anything else if they're actually going to move categories. Now, the KVD Enforcers saw a slight headshot multiplier nerf. That's a decent nerf for what it is. Honestly, it probably could have been top tier before this update. I would say it probably is more so competitive now. That's a little bit more balanced across the board, which is nice to see. The Interceptor got a few extra nerfs here. The Sprint to Fire, the ADS speeds, both of those got nerfed. And then also the neck multiplier got nerfed. So that's even a little bit worse now, which is nice to see considering how broken it was for so long, right? The MCW 6.8, personally, that's my go-to marksman rifle. I love this thing. They actually buffed the ADS speed, which is nice. However, they did nerf the hip fire spread and the velocity a tad bit. You can gain that back with attachments though, so in my opinion, it's still staying top tier. Another bit of an overdue one, but the LMS probably should have been out of below average some time ago. They buffed the idle sway on this, so it's even more accurate now. I'm saying this is definitely a competitive marksman slash battle rifle. It's kind of limited in ammo and it's definitely a higher skill gap with its fire rate, but man, it puts out damage like crazy. Now the crossbow actually got a buff, which I guess is nice to see. Its one-shot capabilities are now extended to the neck and the head, so that's cool, but it's still a super niche weapon. And then this is one that I'm very happy about. The XRK Stalker can now one-shot in its first damage range, which is anywhere from like 50 to 70-ish meters, depending on the attachments you use on it. It's an absolute meta sniper now because it can one-shot with no ammo restrictions, especially for Resurgence. This is the #1 go-to sniper in my opinion. The Cat obviously can still one-shot at any range as well, so between Resurgence and regular BR, that's a great choice. So the Stalker gets a huge upgrade with this patch. I love to see that. Now the Longbow actually got an update as well. They buffed the ADS speed, but they actually nerfed its long-range damage, so not really doing all that much. It's definitely more of a quick scope gimmicky type of weapon. Can't really one-shot to the head unless there's super low armor or super low health, so gonna stay in mediocre there, but it did get some interesting changes there. They also nerfed the Signal here as well. They nerfed its mid-range damage range there, so kind of a strange one if you're hitting upper body shots. That shouldn't affect you too much there. The SPX also saw a nerf here with its ADS speed. Kind of a strange one, but it's still just going to be mediocre at the end of the day there. They actually ended up changing the Renetti as well. This is a bit of an interesting one just because the Renetti does have the conversion kit, obviously, and that's what was affected here. The movement penalty on that actually got buffed. So the Renetti conversion kit's going to be a little bit faster now. It's nice to see, but at the end of the day, it's still not doing crazy damage or anything. And where it's going to be used realistically, SMGs are still going to torch it. It's nice to see that it's moving a little bit faster though. The Stinger also got a damage buff everywhere. Problem is, it's got a crazy fire rate, not really good control, and a super small magazine. So that's like the, concoction of all the bad things mixed into one. While it does have nice damage now, everything else about it is not all that great, so gonna stay mediocre, but it's a little bit better if you know how to hit well with it. And then lastly, the 50 GS, which is just awful. It got a damage buff, which is nice. It's still the 50 GS though. Sucks to use, probably one of the worst starting game weapons when you get that in like Resurgence or something. It's like, okay, I need any gun that's not this ASAP, right? It's a damage buff, but it's not going to make it that much better. And then also the Basilisk is getting some updates here. Got a lower torso buff. That's nice to see. It's still a super niche weapon that's not really realistic in any sort of competitive meta here. But overall, this update did help out a lot with even more variety and balance and diversification, I guess. Sure, you still got some great options here between the absolute meta and top tier choices, but if you wanted to mess around with some other builds, things like the STB can hold their own just fine. You know, the MTZ's got some fun builds. The Geist is a little bit better now. There's some good SMGs from MW2 if you want to mix things up. The SMG category in general is so competitive and so balanced. I love that as well. So pretty solid meta update, all things considered here. And that said, that's going to wrap things up. If you enjoyed the video, do me a favor, drop a like on it. And of course, if you're new here, you want to guarantee that you're always up to date with all things going on in COD, be sure to hit that subscribe button on your way out. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you later. Peace out.